Okay, now let's move on to the proration of overhead question. Assume that you have gone over by your hand. Let's go through the problems together. So note that this company is using a normal costing system, and there is only one single cost pool where the machine hour is used as the allocation base. So these are some budgets and actual information. And these are the machine hours data and the closing balance of each cost of goods sold, finished goods, and work in progress. Okay, so the first question is to calculate the budgeted manufacturing overhead rate for 2023. So mainly we need to calculate based on the budgeted manufacturing overhead and the budgeted machine hour, right? So it's going to be 4.8 million divided by 80,000 mH, right? So this will give us the number of 60 euros per mH. Second, we need to first calculate the under or over allocated portion of overhead. And then we need to prorate using these three different methods. First, let's calculate the applied overhead. So right now we know our predetermined overhead rate of 60 euro per mH. And all we need is the actual cost allocation base, which is the actual machine hours of 75 mH. So our applied overhead is 75,000 mH times 60. After the calculation, you will come up with 4.5 million euro. Now, let's see the actual overheads. Actual overhead is right here, noted as 4.9 million euro. Right? So we can clearly see that the applied overhead is less than the actual overhead, which means that there is a under allocation. By how much? By the difference between the two numbers, which is 400,000 euros. Then we need to first write off to the COGS immediately. If there is an under allocation, it means that we need to further add up the COGS. So we need to debit the COGS by 400,000 euros. But this is not all, right? We need to cancel out the entries. So for example, since we have credited the MOH allocated before, we now need to debit the MOH allocated by 4.5 million. And then we need to credit the MOH control because we have debited before by 4.9 million, right? Okay, then second, let's first erase all these because we don't have enough space. So the two questions left is the proration based on either the closing balance before proration and proration based on the allocated overhead amount before proration, right? So let's first start with the proration based on the closing balances. So the closing balance before proration is given here, right? So COGS 8 million. The finished goods 1,250,000. And lastly, the work in progress of 750,000, right? we need to figure out how much percentage each account for. After the calculation, you will notice that COGS account for 80%, the finished goods 0.125, and the work in progress 0.075. All right. You can check with your answer. Then remember the underallocated amount was 400,000 euros. So we need to each multiply by 400K. Then we will come up with the numbers. So 320,000, 50,000, and 30,000. So basically, we need to debit these amounts, right, to increase further each accounts. How about proration based on the allocated overhead amount? Recall that the allocation is based on the machine hours, right? So more strictly speaking, we have to allocate by multiplying by 60 euro per mH. But here, all we need is the ratio of each account. So we don't really need to know what is the final allocated amount, but just these machine hour numbers, right? So I'm gonna bring these machine hour numbers. All right, so okay, also we are going to do the ratio. Each would be 0.8, 0.147, 0.053, then multiply by the allocated amount. And then you will be coming up with the number of 320,000, 58,800, and lastly 21,200, right? Again, we need to debit by these amounts. So, everything clear? Now, we're going to move on to the last question on this slide. This is going to be the ABC problem. Again, have yourself some time to make your hands dirty, and let's go through the production cost per unit for this product. Again, assume that you have already gone through and you have some final numbers. Let's go through this question together. So here we are interested in calculating the total production cost per unit. Total production cost per unit includes not only the overheads, right? We actually need to also add up the direct costs like the DM and DL. So first of all, let us start with the direct material. And that is exactly given here as 2.5 per unit, right? Now let's move on to DL. It says that it takes 0.403 hours per unit, and each hour takes $18, right? So we can easily calculate per unit basis by multiplying $18 per hour times 0.03, right? That will be $0.54 per unit, right? Now for the MOH, we have 3 different types of activities that we need to consider. These are the cost drivers and activity cost for the next year. How about we first calculate the activity cost rate for each cases? Okay. By what we're basically going to do is, let's say this is A, and let's say these cost driver quantity is B, so we're going to scale A by B, divide A by B, right? Then we will be having some numbers. Let's calculate that first. The first is going to be 250 per setup. And then for the second one, we will be having $300 per inspection, per test. Lastly, 252K divided by 1,800 is going to be $140 per requisition. Okay. Let's first go through the setup. If you read here carefully, it says that machines are reset after each batch, right? So we want to know how many batches are there? How many? Well, that is basically based on this information right here, batch size. Here you want to be not confused that batch size itself is not equal to the number of batches processed. It's not. Batch size means how many units do you have in one batch. That's the batch size. Okay, so for one batch, there is 150 units. Then, suppose if there is a budgeted production of 15,000 units, the total number of batches is nothing more than scaling the 15,000 units by 150. That is 100 batches, right? So these are the number of setups for this product, right? Then let's move on to the setup cost. Okay, so there are 100 batches, right? And for each batch, it's going to be 250, right? So 250, so $25,000. But this is at a total cost term. But what we need is based on a unit term. So per unit, we can calculate by dividing this by the total production unit of 15,000, right? So once you calculate this, this is going to be 1.67. Okay. And also for the midterm, of course, there are some occasions where you need to round to a certain decimal place, like a second place or third place. I'll give you instructions on that, but even if those numbers are a bit different, I'm not gonna go really nitty-gritty on whether you're correct to a certain decimal place. But if you are on the right clock, if you're on the right position, then that's gonna be enough. Okay, so don't worry too much about number differences with the exact solution. As long as you're on the right path, you'll be able to get a full score. Okay. Now for the test, we want to know how many tests there are for this product. It says that quality tests are carried out after every second batch. Note that there were 100 batches, right? And if quality tests are carried out every second batch, how many number of tests? That's going to be exactly the half of 100, which is 50, right? So 50 tests. And we know per test, it takes $300. Right? So 300 50 tests times 300 is going to be $15,000 total. And again, per unit, we can divide this by the production unit of 15,000. So this is going to be 1. Last is the purchase requisition. Okay. So here there are 80 purchase requisitions, and for each requisition, it takes $140 of the indirect costs. So 80 requisition times $140 per requisition, then you will get 11,200 in total. And per unit, you again divide this by 1,000, and then you will be getting, let's see, about 0.75. Okay. Now it's the time to sum up all these 5. Right? So do the calculation, and you'll see that total, the unit cost will be $646 per unit. This is gonna be our answer.